بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. Respected Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, Pro-Vice Chancellor of JNU, Professor Ahmad Qadi, Cultural Counselor, Arab Republic of Egypt in New Delhi, Ms. Afshan Anjum, Program Director, ICCR, New Delhi, Professor Najibin Akhtar, Director, Darat al-Ma'arif al-Uthmaniya, Hyderabad, Professor Muhammad Noman Khan, Professor Mujibur Rahman, the director of this national seminar on contemporary trends in Arabic literature. Ladies and gentlemen, when we're talking about the contemporary Arabic literary discourse, it means that we are talking about that discourse which is multifaceted and which has multi-dimensions. Contemporary Arabic literary discourse represents the Arab writer's cognitive of the multi-dimensional psychic and social reality in a postmodern world. It was neither possible nor desirable for the Arab reader to play innocence vis-à-vis emerging doctrinal and projective literary experiments in a globalized world. So the Arab literary and aesthetic milieu became familiarized with new bandwagons of ultramodernism, metamodernism, new minimalism, new urbanism, cyberpunk, biopunk, post-irony, besides puritanism, futurism, and retrofuturism et al. And the Arab manipulators represented to the neighbor or the world the best he could offer in terms of literary craftsmanship and its sublime aesthetic appeal. But since it is related to Arabic language and literature, we have to pose certain basic questions. What is language? Is it a fixed and freestanding object made up of words on a page? What is meaning? It is something metaphysical caged in the physicality of tongue sounds, engineered through sound vibrations. What is the difference between a writer and a reader? What is the death of the author, Maut al-Mu'allif? The successive literary theories, classicism, romanticism, realism, surrealism, formalism, structuralism or semiotics, post-structuralism or deconstruction, Marxism, feminism and post-colonialism, etc., are doctrinal and physiological evaluative methods study literary narrative with an aim to propose answers to these questions. To talk about contemporary trends in modern Arabic literature is analogous to dealing with modern history of a language and its vast literature in perspectives of the duo of textualism and pragmatism, or the trilogy of literary kinship, history of literature, and literary criticism. In Arab, Oriental, and Western traditions, any conceptualization of the hermeneutical, pedagogical, and aesthetic imports of literary text can hardly be perceived in disregard of the thrice dialectical relationship with ideology or the linkage of principles, parameters, and paradigms, technically known as theories, with the literal text corpus. The intrinsic and extrinsic categorizations, as proposed by Graham Hughes, aims at underlining the proper distinction between pedagogical nature of literature and its total essence. Literary criticism is tasked with and text for realization of this critical obligation in the arena of belles lettres or narrative discourse, with literary theories posited as indispensable tools for the entire inventory of literature to achieve its goal of sensitizing its audience towards conscientization. Literary discourses have traversed a long trajectory of analysis and evaluation paradigms, often replacing the old gold with the new literally, both in terms of process and projective cognitive. For a student of literature, classicism, romanticism, realism, surrealism, modernism, postmodernism, and postmodernism are but the heterogenetic, homodiegetic, and autodiegetic indexes of literary criticism with their inbuilt textual, contextual, and expressive parameters and inputs. The intrinsically inclined heterodiegetic schools of literary enterprise, represented by formalism and its successive progeny of theorizing, represented in structuralism, post-structuralism, or deconstruction, isolate a work of literature from its external reality. On the other hand, the extrinsically inspired literary theories tend to associate a literary piece with its external world. The extrinsic discourse is homodiegetic, meaning that a work of literature is essentially, number one, a representation of the spirit of age, and number two, a reflection of the world in which it operates. In contemporary literary discourse, narratology and narratological epistemology deserves a special mention, thanks to the works of the French literary theorist Gérard Genot and his school, represented by Roland Barthes, Claude Lévi-Strauss, etc. As a typology of narrative, Gérard Genot's theory of narratology is regarded as a reading method that marks an important milestone in the development of literary theory and discourse analysis. By using narrative voice as a concept through which all the other categories are articulated, Genot engaged the context of production as a fundamental element. For Genot, a narrative cannot, in fact, imitate reality, no matter how realistic it is. It is intended to be a fictional act of language arising from a narrative instance. Narrative does not represent a real or fictive story. It recounts it, that is, it signifies it by means of language. There is no place for imitation in narrative. Unquote. This is in place of the two main traditional narrative methods, that is, diegesis and mimesis. Thus, in the place of two main traditional narrative methods, diegesis and mimesis, Genot contends that there are simply varying degree of diegesis, with the narrative either more involved or less involved in the narrative and leaving less room or no room for the narrative act. However, Genot insists in no case is the narrator completely absent. If one is to believe the Egyptian Ihab Hassan, the British Alan Kirby, and their camaraderie, humanity has bypassed postmodernity, a delayed germination of an older seed planted by artists like Michael Duchamp during modernism high of 1920s and 1930s. Postmodernism, as a set of critical and rhetorical practices, sought to destabilize the modernist touchstones of identity, historical progress, and epistemic certainty. As Ihab Hassan said, there moved through this, our period, a vast will to unmaking, affecting the body politic to body cognitive, the erotic body, the individual psyche, the entire realm of discourse in the West. The Arab academia and literati have never been averse to the literary paradigms evolving outside their traditional milieu in any given point of history. The translations of Aristotle's Poetica and Rhetorica by Ishaq ibn Hunayn and Matta ibn Yusuf via Syriac language in the Middle Ages, and consequently their reconciler assimilation in the poetic canons of Farabi, Qudama ibn Ja'far, Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, Hazim al-Qartajini, and others are best examples to drive home the point. Reformist drives of Muhammad Ali Pasha included missions to European capitals, chiefly Paris, and translation of European books of science and literature into Arabic, under the aegis of Madrasatul Alsun, founded in 1835 and headed by Rifa' al-Tahtawi. At the end of 20th century, Arabic literary scholars began applying Western models to the evaluation of Arabic literary criticism. Marxist socialism proved especially popular thanks to the endeavors of a camaraderie headed by Michel Aflaq and his friends in Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. But it was not until more recently, in the 1970s and 1980s, that structuralism was applied to Arabic literary criticism. In his pioneer work towards the structural analysis of pre-Islamic poetry, Kamal Abu Dib applied Levi-Strauss' technique of myth analysis to Labid's Mu'allaqat, declaring that the three modern movements which have made it possible to view the universe as it was previously viewed are Marxism, Picasso's vision, and structuralism. Structuralist studies in Arab world thrive especially in North Africa. Most Arab critics who use linguistic techniques have been North Africans who keep closely in touch with intellectual developments in France. Amongst them, the dominant influences have been of Todorov, Roland Barthes, Vladimir Propp, and Lucien Goldman. Scholars such as Moroccan Fihri Al-Fasi, Syrian in exile Algerian Abdurrahman Al-Had Saleh, and I have the privilege of interacting with the duo in several times in Algeria and Morocco. Salah Fadl, Abdul Salam Musaddi, Abdullah Al-Ghazami, among others, figure among the internationally acclaimed structuralist critics in our times. In pre-Islamic Arabia, people believed that poetry was picture perfect for their life, Ash-Shi'ru Diwan al-Arab. But the postmodern Arabic ambience, ebullience with vertical and horizontal flow of works of modern and postmodern sagas made many observers think fiction is the picture perfect of Arab life. Al-Qissatu Diwan al-Arab. This way, Arab writers, academia, critics, readers, and cultural connoisseurs interacted with non-conventional ideas, paradigms, and even whims and fancies in the arena of letters globally. While it testifies the frontiers of Arabia's literary perceptibility at one hand, it on the other uncovers silhouettes of historicity and continuity at one hand, and on the other uncovers silhouettes of historicity and continuity in regard to one meta-narratives such as Arabian Nights and its metamorphoses in postmodern narrative techniques. Among the postmodern Arabic fiction, according to Mustafa Atiyah Jum'a, ما بعد الحداثة في الرواية العربية الجديدة, focusing on the core issues of self, nation, and identity, one can epitomize the Syrian Abdurrahman Hallaq for his Qila' Damira, the Syrian Nihad series for his As-Sumt wa Sakhab, the Algerian Yasmina Saleh for his work Watanum min Zujaj, a story of a generation that does not believe in apologies, the Egyptian Mahmoud Hamid Ahlam Muharrama, and Egyptian Idris Ali for his Infijaru Jumjumatin, which bagged the best Egyptian Nobel Prize in 1999. Notwithstanding the polemics and counter-polemics of ethical, institutional permissibility on holier-than-thou grounds applied to literature, who can dispel the magic of the Moroccan picaresque Mahmoud Shukri and his Al-Khubz al-Hafi, Fatima Mirnisi for her series on Shehrazad, Algerian Tahir Wakhtar, Wasini Al-Araj, most celebrate Arabophone Ahlam Mustaghanimi, Muhammad Mool Sahul, Aka Yasmina Khadra, etc. After the generation of Katib Yasin, Maulud Faraun, Muhammad Deeb have become internationally acclaimed literary figures. Tunisia Salahuddin Boujah, Libya's Ibrahim Al-Kouni, the Egyptian Jamal Al-Ghitani, Edward Al-Kharrat, Ala Al-Aswani, and others after the celebrated Najib Mahfouz, Yahya Haqqi, Tawfiq Al-Hakim, and Palestine's Ghassan Kanafani, Jabra Ibrahim Jabra, and Sihar Khalifa, Syria's Zakaria Tamir, Muhammad Maghut, Abdurrahman Hallaq, Nihad Series, Iraqi Saudi, Abdurrahman Munif, who has given us the longest novel in Arabic which has been written so far in 5 volumes. Jordanian Ghalib Halasa, Saudia's Ghazi Abdurrahman al-Qusaybi, Oman's Saif al-Rahbi, and Saud al-Mudaffar, Yemen's Wajdi al-Ahdal, Sudan's Tayyib Saleh, and Imad Barraka, Iraq's Ghali Farman Ta'ma, among scores of other stalwarts in fiction, have installed Arab narratology on the empyrean of glory and fame in all contemporary perspectives of literary discourse. It goes without saying that a brilliant and diversified, cacophonous yet coherent narrative marks the contemporary Arab fiction. The Egyptian seismograph of social change, the Pharaonist, the allegorist, the chronicler and Nobel laureate Nadvi Mahfouz, with published work of 34 novels and 335 short stories, dozens of movie scripts and 5 plays over a 70-year career, does the most when it comes to grand narrative. The Cairo trilogy depicts the lives of 3 generations of different families in Cairo from World War I until after the 52 military coup that overthrew King Farouk. His works illustrated a macrocosm in Egypt, and by the time a statue was erected in his honor in Cairo in 2003, Nadvi Mahfouz was already a legend in his own lifetime, a literary, ideological, and moral authority. Together with Nadvi Mahfouz, the half-Iraqi Saudi Abdurrahman Munif succeeded with his voluminous works in transforming the literary landscape of Arab world by making the novel central to his cultural and political concerns, just as it had been in Europe during the most of 19th century. 3 novels of the Saudi quiescent were translated into English by Peter Theroux. Cities of Salt, translated by Peter Theroux, in The Trench, and Variations on Night and Day, published by Knopf in New York. The Munif's words are a narrative of encounter with disruptions, losses, material wealth, corruption, politics, distorted modernity, and finally of himself. Ahmad Saadawi's novel Frankenstein in Baghdad, which just won the 2014 International Prize for Arabic Fiction, revolves around a suicide bombing that shakes a neighborhood in the Iraqi capital. It is a fictional representation of the process of everyone killing everyone. The story rotates around among a large cast of characters, moving briskly from dilapidated alleys to gated compounds, drawing the reader into a web of mysterious crimes with moments of occasional lightness, whether from gossiping neighbors or advice-swapping ghosts. The ever-increasing new and adventurous forms in Arabic contemporary literary works are a valued repertoire and artistic metamorphose of contemporary globalized, digitalized, and demoralized world. In the unemployed by the Egyptian novelist Nasser Iraq, a disillusioned new university graduate from Cairo slumps up, ending working as a waiter, dreaming of going to Dubai. Suppressed by his father and frustrated by his unemployment, Muhammad Zabbal becomes sexually impotent. His self-confidence totally eroded, Muhammad represents a generation that has been failed by the state. Similar social and cultural conditions are portrayed from a different but equally sober perspectives in The Women of Basatin by the Tunisian Habib Silmi, set in the Basatin middle-class district of the capital city of Tunis. Silmi beautifully paints the changes in society where a mix of social and economic frustration leads to the rise of religiosity, which is exhibited after the evolution by the stunning victory of the Islamists in Tunisia. 2 Lebanese novels deserve special mention in this context. The Rose of Belgrade by Rabi'a Jaber and The Vagrant by Jabur Duhay, after fresh portrayals of sectarianism in Lebanon, one historic and another one recent. In the Rabi' Daruz, we go back to the second half of the 19th century, when hundreds of Daruz, a self-absorbed religious minority in Lebanon and Syria, were deported by the Ottoman rulers and sent to Belgrade. The protagonist of the Algerian Bashir Mufti, The Toy of Fire, warns army generals who held the country in their own iron grip for decades that the resolution that the revolution of the suppressed is coming, reflecting on the bloody 10-year war, civil war in the country during the 90s. Mufti's characters debunk the generous belief that after their playing of various groups off against each other and the rivers of blood spilled, the people are now exhausted with no energy left for revolution. In embrace on Brooklyn Bridge by the Egyptian Izzeddin Shukri Fisher, born 1660, we are led to a different setting, yet with some of the same theme. A successful migrant New York University professor who had left Cairo after losing hope in his country organizes a gathering of his family and friends for one night after being diagnosed with fatal cancer. In a masterful narrative about their journey to reach home in New York, Fisher takes us into the memories of each, from a confused granddaughter who is torn between Cairo and New York with her divorced parents separate living to a distant relative who lives in New York but who has become a religious fanatic and expresses sympathy for those who have perpetuated the 9/11 atrocities. The Arab uprising, the spring literature in Tunisia, Egypt, and Yemen represent a sense of heightened cultural production across the Arab world. Across the Arab world, there have been ongoing debate about which pre-2011 novels which have predicted the uprisings and with the rise in works chronicle them, about where to draw the line between literature and reportage. In the rest of the world, readers have been reached to Arabic literature to understand more about recent events. In the Arab feminist literary scenario, we have a number of prominent writers such as the Moroccan Fatima Mernissi, Egyptian Nawal al-Saadawi, Kuwaiti Leila Uthman, Palestinian Sihar Khalifa, and Saudi Raja Abdullah Sani', and others, with a long list of literary and social works. In all these novels, the troubles of the Arab world are laid bare. Perhaps local and foreign intelligence that was taken by surprise by the Arab Spring would start reading fiction instead of spying on people. In bringing writers together, I have brought to showcase writing and engage with the socio-political context, but is not solely defined by its expectations. Under the change of the 5 years are written in these authors' life as well. The narrators apart, modern and contemporary Arabic poetry represents all the socio-psychic tides of time and mark human life. From romanticism to symbolism, social realism, surrealism, existentialism, Arabism, pan-Arabism, radical ethicist activism, resistance, post-colonialism, postmodernism, and Arab Spring, the muses of modern Arabia form a highly revered circle in the global Parnassus for their remarkable arabesque engineering of rhyming on both traditional and non-conventional scansion paradigms. The reader never fails to hail the poetic diction, thought appeal, and aesthetic charm in the live worlds created by poets such as the social realist Abdul Wahab al-Bayati and Badr Shakir al-Sayyab, the existentialist Khalil Hawi, and Badr Shakir al-Sayyab, the existentialist Khalil Hawi and Adonis, the romantic Nizar Qabbani, the revolutionary Mufdi Zakaria, Muhammad al-Fayturi, Tawfiq Ziyad, Fadwa Tawqan, and Mahmoud Darwish, Samih al-Qasim, the Gothic Muhammad Mehdi al-Jawahiri, or the contemporaries such as Muzaffar al-Saud and Muzaffar al-Nawab, Ali Ja'far al-Allaq, Ahmad Matar, and Hassan al-Amrani, who has 20 volumes of his poetry now in modern times in Emirates. Ladies and gentlemen, amid cacophony of stark imagery to monologue, graffiti, anecdotes, picaresque, and burlesque, Frankenstein's advocacy, Gothic and Picasian, realpolitik, suicide bombing, hugs and blows, and virtual Kama Sutra, ala Saud al-Muzaffar's al-Muharramat. Many and meta-narratives, Arab states have never been more in crisis than they are today, whether they have been destabilized by outside intervention, sectarian strife, religious extremism, or the demand of fed-up citizens. The government's ideologies, which once held out the promise of dignity and advancement, have become threadbare covers for corruption and repression. In specter of their own dissolution is one of their main mobilizing tactics. One can only regret the staggering waste, chaos, and suffering this has entailed. But Arab writers are stitching the pieces together again. That emerges may not be, but what emerges may not be pretty, but it is already fascinating. The Arab postmodern narrative and poetic apogee, both insuline and diaspora, like its Western counterpart, is a collation of images that combine between sadomasochist and virgin, a virtual Madonna, a savoir and a cliffhanger, a quagmire of sociology, politics, and philosophy that pleads for transformation from an academically and casually sexist, racist, and homophobic society to one that legislates for and promotes equality in a postmodern, rather post-postmodern world. I congratulate the organizers for choosing such a significant and pertinent topic for academic meditation in a parnassus of muses like Jawaharlal Nehru University. Personally, I thank Professor Mujibur Rahman and his learned colleagues for inviting me to join the platform. Thank you very much.